Hi everyone, I'm Tacey Goheen, the Community Services Director here at Still Hopes. So glad to welcome you today to our Healthy Dynamics for September. The title of our program today is For the Beauty of the Earth, a tour of Still Hopes grounds. We are so thrilled today to have Chris Spearen, our wonderful grounds supervisor and landscaper extraordinaire, to be with us to describe to us the plantings here in the front of McDowell. So stay tuned, welcome Chris, and can't wait to get started.
Good afternoon everyone. In case you don't know, I'm Chris Spearen, the landscape supervisor here at Still Hopes. I started working here about 3 years ago. It'll be my 3-year anniversary, October 2nd. And we are standing at the front entrance of the McDowell building. And all around me here is a collection of plants that we put in the ground earlier this summer. And I kind of like to walk everybody through the plants and talk about some of the things that are in here, some of the more unusual and interesting plants. One of my passions, I've got a lot of different kinds of plants that I absolutely love, but one of them happens to be like hardy succulents and hardy plants from the desert Southwest in northern Mexico. And a lot of those plants grow beautifully here in South Carolina, even through the winter. The main thing with the desert plants is making sure they have good drainage, that they stay nice and dry, that their roots are able to drain off. So I've got a container here that I put together. These are called ghost plants, right over through here, and you can see a leaf just broke off. Now, all of these plants that are in this container actually came from my house at home, and the way I propagate these is you can literally just break off a leaf like this, and where it broke off, you just stick the tip of it right in the dirt, and it'll root. And over time, that plant will grow into one of these larger plants. They're very easy to propagate. I've been using them in containers and raised beds throughout the campus, and I just absolutely love them. This is a spineless prickly pear. This is a selection called Old Mexico, and I got this from a division off of a plant that was growing in a parking lot at a motel in Arizona. I asked permission first, and I took a couple of these pads off the plant, stuck them in the ground at home, and it grew into this nice cactus. And these will actually, as they mature, they'll have yellow flowers that look like Gerber daisy flowers. So they're a cool plant, and one of the few prickly pears, you can see me, I'm just touching this with reckless abandon. They're one of the few prickly pears that are user-friendly, so no spines on this kind. One of my favorite shrubs is a plant that's been growing in South Carolina gardens forever, and it's called fragrant tea olive. This one is a young plant. It'll start flowering in a few more weeks, but basically tea olives, they flower any month with an R in them. So they'll start flowering sometime in September, and then they'll continue to flower on and off all the way through March. They have clusters of white flowers that are held on the insides of the leaves, and it is absolutely my most favorite fragrance ever. I tell people when it's my time to go and I'm at the gates of heaven, it's going to smell like tea olives. So they are just spectacular plants. I adore these plants. One of the few plants that we grow from Australia is this guy. It's called a bottle brush shrub. Now, these flower during the spring and summertime with these clusters of flowers that are held on the new growth. It'll flower off and on throughout the spring and summer, and during mild falls, they'll continue to flower. So we actually have some flower buds forming on these new tips right here. And those will open up into these clusters of little beautiful red flowers that look like they're in the shape of a bottle brush. So that's a great plant for evergreen texture, nice fine foliage. This is a plant that I get asked about all the time. And a lot of plants, their Latin name is actually their common name. So, for instance, most plants are called their common name. So this plant, the Latin name is Clistamon australis, but everybody knows it as the bottle brush. The name of this plant is called Farfugium japonicum. That's the Latin name. But everybody calls it farfugium. That is its common name. There are plants and all kinds of shrubs and different things that, you know, their Latin name becomes the common name. So a very popular shrub around here is called loropetalums. I'm sure many of you have heard of those. They're a purple evergreen shrub. We've got some small ones growing over here. The common name is Asian witch hazel, but nobody calls it that. Everybody calls them loropetalums. Back to the farfugiums. These are evergreen in Columbia, South Carolina, and they flower typically in the late winter through early spring. They'll send up these spikes of yellow daisy-like flowers. And they've got this great big glossy evergreen leaf. People love these plants, and I started growing this plant probably 10 or 15 years ago in Columbia, and now they're becoming more readily available. You'll see them at nurseries for sale around Columbia, and I get a lot of comments about this particular variety of plant. But if you go to a nursery, just ask the nursery manager or the clerk for farfugiums, and that's these guys right here. So I'm sure everybody's familiar with hydrangeas. This is an old heirloom variety called Penny Mac. So I've got a lot of fondness for historical plants of the southeastern U.S. You know, camellias, for example, hydrangeas. But this is an old variety called Penny Mac. It's known for blooming basically throughout the entire summer and into fall. These are young plants, but as they get larger, they'll have more and more blossoms on them. But typically, hydrangeas will flower like June, July, early August, and then they're done. But this is one that repeats blooms. It'll repeat bloom throughout the fall until the frost hits it. So, you know, here in the Midlands of South Carolina, we might not get a heavy freeze or a frost until well into late November, early December. So, and hydrangeas make great cut flowers, and this variety, Penny Mac, you know, I remember taking cuttings off of mine at home and making arrangements for Thanksgiving. So this is a great old variety of hydrangea, Penny Mac. And one of the things about hydrangeas, the flower color is oftentimes determined by the soil acidity. So if you want your flowers to be blue, you can add what's called a soil acidifier, and it'll actually turn the flowers of these hydrangeas blue. But if the soil is more neutral, like this soil is, the flowers will be pinkish colored right here. Right next to it here is a great salvia. Garden sage, I guess, is one of the common names. Most people just call them salvias. But this is one called Argentine sage. This is a fuchsia colored one. The cultivar name on this one is called Rockin' Fuchsia. And it's definitely been a rockin' plant. It's been a really good performer for us. It's bloomed all summer long. And you can see, like, even where I'm pointing at my fingertip, we have new flower buds forming on these. And these will flower throughout the summer into the fall until the freeze hits it sometime in late fall, early winter. This is a great plant for attracting pollinators. So you see a lot of butterflies and hummingbirds go to this plant right here. Easy, easy plant to grow, and it perennializes here. So, you know, what that basically means is when this plant does get hit by a freeze, the foliage will die back down to the ground, but the roots will remain alive. And once the soil temperatures start to warm up around March or April, it'll start to grow back out. And then in the growing season, throughout that growing season, it'll fill back into, you know, a pretty large plant, you know, 2.5 feet wide, maybe 2.5 feet tall, and just loaded with flowers throughout the summertime. In front of it, we have a plant called euphorbia. This cultivar, I believe, is called Snow in Summer. It's an annual, but it's a peak performing annual. So this plant does great in the southeastern U.S. I use it quite a bit in flower beds, and it flowers like this all spring and summer long and into the fall, and it'll get quite large. I mean, when we planted these plants, they were in 3-inch pots and maybe the size of like a coffee cup saucer. And within a period of couple of months, they grew into these larger plants, and they just have these clouds of white flowers that are very delicate. So I like using plants with really delicate flowers like this in combination with plants that have like a bolder texture. So we've got these, the wider leaves of the hydrangeas next to the finer flowers and the foliage of this euphorbia right here. Moving on down, we have a lot of universities and large nurseries, universities that have horticulture programs, and nurseries that focus on producing new varieties of plants. So every growing season, I like to try to pick 1 or 2 new varieties of plants and see how they do. This is another variety of loropetalum. The common name on this one is called jazz hands, and do not ask me why it's called jazz hands loropetalums, but that's the name of it. But this is the first loropetalum that I'm aware of that has variegated foliage. So if you look at the darker color, most loropetalums are like a solid dark purple, but this one has pink to almost cream colored flecking throughout the leaves. And so far so good. We planted these plants very recently, but they've done well for us. We'll see how they do over the winter time. But that's a plant that's going to give us a lot of color year round, because these loropetalums are evergreen. And this will form like a large shrub border or a small shrub border, but these will grow together. I'll probably train them to be about waist high. And this will be like a block of color that will look nice even throughout the winter time. So what I like to do when I'm designing or laying out a bed, I like to pick plants that flower at different points of the year. And then I also like to mix in evergreens with perennials and annuals and deciduous plants. So the evergreens, I usually refer to them as like the bones of the garden. They give structure to the garden. So all throughout this bed we have boxwoods, we have the evergreen farfugums, the bottlebrush, that little conifer down there, the tea olive, and those will remain up and green year round. Then we'll come in sometime like, we started doing this in this bed, we'll plant some perennials that will flower in the fall. So when we walk around to the other side, you'll start to see like garden mums and asters, which bloom September, October, November, which gives us a larger season of flowers. These are variegated boxwoods. This is not a new variety of plant. There's actually a couple of variegated boxwoods on the right side of the mansion that pre-existed my employment here. And we've had these growing on the campus for at least 3 or 4 years. These were just planted. But again, the variegation just gives it this striking color. I love boxwoods, don't get me wrong. I mean, the solid green ones are nice, but I like having different varieties of color and texture. So when these get a little bit taller and fill in, it'll kind of bleed into these loropetalums down here, which is another variety of loropetalum. So we'll have, I love the color texture, the color combination of purple and yellow. So I think this will look mighty sharp when it all kind of grows together. This the variegation of the boxwoods with the dark purple loropetalums and the pinkish loropetalums down there. Moving on down, these are elephant ears. And you can see why they're called elephant ears. The leaves are kind of shaped like an elephant ear. This is a cultivar called Black Magic. And this is a variety that's been out for about 20 plus years or so. We are very, very blessed to be in Columbia, South Carolina for a variety of reasons. One of my biggest things, one of the things that I appreciate most about living and gardening in Columbia is the zone that we live in. Like, the whole country is divided up into different agricultural zones. We're zone 8, which means for us, we can grow both tropical plants, subtropical plants, temperate plants. So a lot of varieties, there can be much more variety of plants grown in Columbia than there could be, let's say, even in southern Florida or up in New England. Here we can grow a little bit of everything. So we can grow a lot of tropical plants. This is a plant that I believe is native to Asia and the jungles of the tropics, I believe, like Thailand. But this plant will die back down to the ground during the winter, but it'll come back year after year. And have these large, bold, tropical leaves. And speaking of tropical plants, one of my favorite is this guy right here. This is called Brugmansia, or the common name is angel's trumpet. I'm going to pick off one of these flowers, but this one is called, I believe it's called pink cherub. But look at that gorgeous flower. These plants need a little bit of time before they start to really perform. We just planted this plant earlier this summer, but again, this is a tropical plant. These guys are actually native to South America, but this will die back down to the ground. It'll come back next season, and next year it's even going to have more flowers. I've seen these plants when they're 2 or 3 years old, and they have so many of these flowers that you could barely see the foliage in between the flowers. And I just think that'll be spectacular. It's got a flower that you wouldn't expect to see in a garden in South Carolina. But again, this is a plant, even though it's native to South America, people have been growing this plant in South Carolina for generations. These are great, what are called pass-along plants. So what I mean by that is, I mean, before modern technology, the way people used to get new varieties of plants is they would pass them along to their neighbors. We would, and I say we because I'm old enough to, I predate the internet. So I remember actually sending cuttings to people, and they would send me cuttings in return. And this, of course, was in the late 80s, early 90s. So in this case, with pass-along plants like this Brugmansia, when I say take a cutting, I'm going to clip one of these off real quick, and just to kind of demonstrate. You can easily propagate this plant. So you can take this plant, and what I would do in this situation is I would strip off all these leaves, and maybe just leave the tallest leaves on the top. And some of these leaves I'm going to keep on the top, but all the bottom leaves I'm going to strip off. But if you look closely at the stem, you see these are called leaflets. So these will actually form new leaves. So if you put this plant, even like a glass of water in a windowsill, it'll root, and it roots very easily. But you want to take all the leaves off, so this cutting will, it'll put more of the energy of the cutting into the roots rather than into the leaves. And almost, I would say, close to 100% of the cuttings of this plant that I've tried to root have rooted. It's that easy. So that's how I've gotten a lot of my plants in my gardens, and that's going back to like the succulents that we have over there that came from my garden at home. That's how we would propagate plants, and that's how we would get plants. And we still do that too. We still do that to this day. We trade plants. But again, this is Brugmansia. Angel's trumpet is the common name, and it's a great plant. I'm just gonna, got my soil knife here. I'm just gonna put this in the ground real quick, just like so. And I'm willing to bet within 3 or 4 weeks that plant will start to root. And then it could be dug up and planted in another garden, or, shared around the campus somewhere, things of that nature.
Corey or David?
Got another tea olive here. We got some more of the farfugiums. These guys right here, when I was talking about the farfugiums earlier, let me cut down my radio. Sorry about that. These still have a hint of some of their flowers on them. So typically these spikes will be covered in yellow flowers, but not only do they make a great texture, but like I was saying, they flower late winter through early spring, but occasionally they'll just sporadically, throw out another flower stalk here and there. But over here, just want to kind of demonstrate how we transition our flower beds through the different seasons. One of our landscapers here, his name is Justin. He just planted these plants going down this row through here. So this is an evergreen ground cover called a juga. These leaves turn a nice deep purple during the winter, and they'll spread and form like a little evergreen carpet along the front here. And then kind of behind them here, we get 2 different fall flowering plants. We have an aster right here, and an old-fashioned garden mum right here. I like blue and yellow together quite a bit with purple. So these plants, as you can see, they're opening up their flowers now, but they have a lot of flower buds forming in the centers of these plants. Those plants will continue to grow and flower throughout the rest of the fall. So as these spring and summer plants are kind of winding down, some of the other seasonal plants of the fall will be picking up. So we can have a bed like this with literally year-round flowers. And then again, one of the themes I like to do is combine different colors and textures of evergreen plants, and I've done that back over here. In this bed, I like creating like elements of symmetry. So we have a lot of the same plantings on both sides of the entrance. So if you look to the right and to the left, we have the the regular mondo grass over here. We've got these blue glazed pots on both sides, and we use a lot of the same plantings on both sides. So you see the boxwoods, the farfugiums again. And behind it here, you know, this hedgerow will actually continue to get larger, and we're going to train that hedgerow to be probably about 4 feet tall. So just above the perennials there. And it's got basically a theme of 3 different plants: rosemary, the purple loropetalums, and a yellow evergreen euonymus. So that kind of repetition of color and texture will remain all year round. So that's you know, again, going back to what I was saying, providing structure, some of the bones of the garden, those evergreen shrubs and evergreen herbaceous plants like the farfugiums, you know, they give us something to work with year round, while the younger plants, the annuals and perennials, kind of fill in and grow. Justin and I, we've been working in these beds around McDowell this morning, putting in some of the fall plants. Now this salvia right here, I'll tell you like a little hint or a trick that I've learned over the years. During the fall, nurseries will put their summer flowering plants on sale for like 50% off. So this is what's called a bedding salvia. But however, in this climate, in Columbia, South Carolina, this is sold as an annual, which means that typically will only live 1 season and then it dies. But this plant, because we live in Columbia where our winters are mild, it'll actually perennialize. So I found these at a local, actually bought these at Lowe's, and they were 50% off, and they're perfectly great plants. People think they're just bedding plants, but these will come back year after year. These will flower during the spring and summer and basically until frost hits it. But then it'll die back down to the ground and come back. So I went ahead and got these because I can't resist a good sale. 50% off for this, come on. We gotta get them. And then I put in some, mixed in some asters right here, which Justin's gonna plant. One of the things that we do here is we compost a lot of like our old pine straw that we rake out of the beds, the leaf litter we collect. We have an area where we pile that up and turn it over, and we make our own compost. So whenever I'm putting in new plants, we'll put in this compost that we make. You know, a lot of people think that, you know, this is reducing, reusing, and recycling, and that's very true. But some of my mentors taught me a lot about composting. There's a lady that's very dear to me. Her name is Tommy Moody. She's 83 years old, and I've been gardening with her for almost 20 years, and she's taught me a lot of information. And so we make compost, and she actually taught me how to make compost 2 decades ago, the right way to do it. So we make this free compost, we mix it in, we broadcast it out over the entire area that we plant, and then we'll put a slow release fertilizer, a little granular that will continue to fertilize the plants over the growing season too. But there was a question about training plants, like how do we train plants? Okay, so all of these shrubs in here were just planted earlier this summer. We got these loropetalums here, and then we've got what's called a false holly. It's actually a tea olive relative down here. So this hedgerow, this particular one, I want to train to about waist high. So these guys eventually they'll get 6 or 7 feet tall, even taller than that with time. But what we'll do is we're not going to prune the sides of these plants at all. We want them to grow together. So over the next 2 to 3 years, these plants will completely fill in and get some height. But while they're growing up, we'll pick the ideal height, which in this case we want somewhere around waist high, and then we'll start clipping it over the growing season, just the tops of those plants. You know, a good rule of thumb is like, you know, a typical newly planted shrub, the typical size is a 3-gallon size plant. So these are all 3 gallons. And one of the old rules of thumb is the first year it sleeps, the second year it creeps, and the third year it leaps. meaning a new planting like this, you can expect it to fill in and be mature over a period of about 3 years. So the first year, they're spending a lot of time just getting the roots established. They'll grow some. The second year, they'll start putting on more growth. And by the third year, you're starting to manage a mature shrub. So, you know, with that in mind, I keep the spacing and the size of the plants in mind when I make decisions about what goes where and how it's going to be used in the future. So, anybody got a question?
So thank you, Chris, for being with us today for that wonderful tour of our front entrance here at the Harry McDowell apartment building here at Still Hopes, our beautiful home. We look forward to next month when Chris will do part 2 of this series of For the Beauty of the Earth, and Chris will actually take some of your questions during that time. So stay tuned and be on the lookout to be able to ask questions to Chris. Also, don't forget this afternoon to look for chocolate in your box. We can't have healthy dynamics without chocolate. Thank you so much and have a wonderful afternoon.